What if the man who testified against you was actually the real killer? What if the justice system believed him and hanged you for his crimes? Welcome to History Corner. In November 1949, a young man walks into a police station. His hands tremble. His wife is dead, he says. But when the police arrive at his flat, they find something else, something worse. 2 bodies, a confession, a gallows, case closed. Until, 3 years later, the floorboards of that same house start bleeding secrets. This is the story of a man who hanged for murders he didn't commit, and the real killer who lived just downstairs. Timothy Evans was Welsh, born in Merthyr Tydfil in November 1924. He started speaking later than usual and would later struggle in school. Due to an accident at the age of 8, he suffered from tubercular sore on his right foot. The sore never healed and would often keep him out of school for treatments. As an adult, Evans, with an IQ around 70, had limited literacy skills and often required assistance to read lengthy documents, although he could manage simple texts like comics and newspaper football reports. He often concocted stories about himself to boost his self-esteem, a habit that continued into adulthood and hindered his efforts to establish credibility with law enforcement and the courts. He even claimed his father was an Italian count. As his mother explained, he didn't have any real confidence in himself and had to lie to cover up. As an adult, he drank excessively and had a volatile temper. Standing at only 5 feet, 5 inches, and weighing just under 140 pounds, his small stature possibly fueled his aggression. Throughout his life, he was frequently labelled a runt. By September 1947, Evans had wed Beryl Thorley, only 9 months after their first encounter on a blind date. In spring 1948, Timothy and Beryl relocated to the upper flat at 10 Rillington Place. Married for less than a year, they were already anticipating the arrival of their first child, a daughter they named Geraldine. Timothy swiftly formed a bond with his neighbour downstairs. It was an unexpected friendship, given that John Christie was old enough to be Tim's father. Christie took on a mentor role for Tim, who admired and looked up to him. Christie's childhood companions characterised him as an odd boy, who stayed to himself and was not very popular. His struggles with impotence started in his teenage years. His initial sexual encounters were unsuccessful, earning him the nicknames Reggie No Dick and Can't Do It Christie from his peers. Christie's sexual issues persisted throughout his life. He generally found he could only function with prostitutes. During the First World War, Christie joined the British Army. He was injured in a mustard gas attack and spent a month in a military hospital in Calais. He later asserted that this incident rendered him blind and mute for 3.5 years and permanently affected his ability to speak loudly. There's no evidence of Christie's blindness. Although he may have lost his voice when he was admitted to the hospital, he would not have been discharged as fit for duty if he had remained mute. It's been proposed that Christie's soft-spoken nature was more likely a psychological response to the gas attack rather than a permanent toxic consequence. This behaviour, combined with Christie's habit of magnifying the effects of the incident, was linked to a histrionic personality disorder that drove him to exaggerate or fake illness to attract attention and sympathy. Christie wed Ethel Simpson from Bradford at the Halifax Register Office on 10th May 1920. His impotence persisted, leading him to continue frequenting prostitutes. The couple separated after only 4 years. In 1923, Christie relocated to London, where he spent the following 10 years cycling in and out of prison, while Ethel stayed in Yorkshire with her family. His first conviction was for stealing postal orders while he was working as a postman, for which he received 3 months' imprisonment on 12th April 1921. He served his sentence at HM Prison Manchester and was released on 27th June. 2 years later, Christie was then convicted obtaining money on false pretences and of violent conduct, for which he was placed on probation for 12 months. In 1924, he was found guilty of 2 additional thefts, resulting in consecutive sentences of 3 and 6 months at HM Prison Wandsworth. On 13th May 1929, following more than 2 years of employment as a lorry driver, Christie was charged with assaulting Maud Cole, his live-in partner, and received a 6-month hard labour sentence. He had struck Cole on the head with a cricket bat, an act the magistrate labelled as a murderous attack, leading to his return to HM Prison Wandsworth. Finally, Christie was convicted of car theft and was re-imprisoned at Wandsworth for 3 months in November 1933. He was released from prison in January 1934. Of course, Timothy was unaware of all of this. Following 9 years apart, Christie and Ethel reunited in 1934 when he was released from prison, though he still frequented prostitutes. In 1937, the Christies relocated to the top-floor flat at 10 Rillington Place in Notting Hill. Back then, Notting Hill wasn't the posh area it is today. It was a rather dilapidated part of London. By 1938, they had relocated to the ground-floor flat, granting them sole access to the back garden. The modest Victorian house, positioned adjacent to a factory wall, provided views of train tracks and factory chimneys belching smoke. Dust settled on the windowsills, and the paint on the facade was peeling. The upper floors housed 2 other flats of similar size. A single outhouse in the garden was shared by all 3 flats, as the building lacked a bathroom. Additionally, there was a common wash house, though it was often out of order. Christie applied to become a member of the War Reserve Police and was accepted. The authorities neglected to verify if he had a criminal record. He was stationed at the Harrow Road Police Station, where he initiated an affair with a woman named Gladys Jones. Their relationship continued until mid-1943, when her husband, who was a soldier, returned from the war. Upon discovering the affair, Jones's husband went to her residence, found Christie there, and gave him quite a beating. Timothy and Beryl's marriage was marked by frequent heated arguments. Beryl was said to be an inadequate housekeeper and unable to handle the family's finances, while Timothy squandered his earnings on alcohol, with his heavy drinking worsening his already volatile temper. The neighbours could hear the loud disputes between Timothy and Beryl, and physical altercations between them were witnessed multiple times. In 1949, Beryl informed Timothy that she was pregnant with their second child, and she was unhappy about it. Given their financial struggles, Beryl decided to have an abortion. Timothy was opposed to the idea, but Beryl was determined, and he eventually conceded. When Timothy told Christie that Beryl was expecting and wished to terminate the pregnancy, Christie persuaded Timothy that he possessed the necessary skills to carry out the procedure. Christie claimed he had gained medical knowledge during his time in the War Reserve Police and had successfully performed several abortions before. They had no way of knowing that not only did he have no medical expertise, but he had very different intentions. On November 7th, Evans went to work and Beryl made arrangements with Christie to perform the abortion the following day, while Tim was at work. Christie claimed he went upstairs to Beryl. She spread a quilt in front of the fire and lay down on it, ready. She panicked and he started hitting her. Then he retrieved a cord and strangled her. In one version, he mentioned attempting to have intercourse with her and failing, while in another, he stated that he succeeded. He later gave a different account. He also claimed that he had discovered her on the quilt, trying to commit suicide using gas. She had offered him sex in exchange for his assistance, which he accepted. Nonetheless, he was unable to engage in intercourse with her. Evans returned home that evening, and Christie met him at the base of the stairs. He instructed Evans to go up first, promising to follow shortly. Once upstairs, Christie delivered the grim news. "It's bad news. It didn't work." He directed Evans to the bedroom, where Evans found his wife lying on the bed, covered by a blanket. When he pulled the blanket back, he saw that she was dead, with blood coming from her mouth, nose, and vagina. Evans then went into the kitchen to tend to his baby, and Christie mentioned that they would talk later. When they did, Christie actually tried to convince Evans that Beryl might have died from septic poisoning. He claimed he had discovered her stomach to be septic poisoned. Christie warned Evans that going to the authorities would implicate them both, potentially resulting in a manslaughter charge. He emphasized that all he had tried to do was assist. Moreover, Evans was partially complicit, having prior knowledge and doing nothing to prevent it. His history of altercations with his wife would also make him a prime suspect. Evans was easily convinced to stay silent. Christie then suggested he would take care of disposing of the body. However, he found himself unable to manage alone. They ended up carrying Beryl into Mr. Kitchener's flat, leaving her in the kitchen, hoping he wouldn't return from the hospital soon. Christie assured Evans that he would dispose of her down one of the drains later. Evans wished to bring his daughter to his mother's home, but Christie talked him out of it, suggesting it would raise suspicion. Christie assured him he would devise a plan and handle the situation. They then went their separate ways and retired for the night. The following day, Christie informed Evans that he would take responsibility for the baby. He mentioned knowing a young couple who would take her in. Evans was instructed to tell others that Beryl and the baby had gone on a holiday. Christie looked after the child that day, but the next day, Evans prepared her for transport. Christie told him that the young couple would come that day to collect the baby. That was the last time Timothy would see Geraldine alive. Christie persuaded the man to sell his furniture and prepare to leave town. Evans complied. Christie concealed the remains in the wash house. Supporting this theory was his visit to the physician the following day, seeking treatment for severe lumbar discomfort. Though he frequently complained of various ailments, this particular symptom had never before emerged, suggesting its authenticity. The most probable explanation was unusual physical strain, consistent with bearing a substantial burden. When Evans came back from Merthyr Vale on November 23rd, he inquired about his daughter. Christie informed him that he needed to leave, or they could both get into trouble. He could see his daughter in 2 or 3 weeks. Evans went to stay with his aunt, where he fabricated several stories about Beryl's whereabouts. Evans' aunt confronted him about the inconsistencies. Lacking the mental capacity to handle the situation, he soon found himself at the Merthyr Tydfil police station, making the peculiar statement, "I have disposed of my wife. I put her down the drain." Evans said that his wife had died, but he was not responsible for her death. Fearing that implicating Christie, an ex-police officer, would only cause him trouble, he initially claimed that a stranger had provided him with something to help Beryl terminate the pregnancy. According to Evans, he met a man who had given him medication meant to induce a miscarriage. He let his wife take the bottle but cautioned her against using it. However, upon returning from work that day, he discovered her lifeless. He tended to the baby, uncertain about what to do next, and worried that the police would suspect him of her murder. The following morning, he placed his wife's body head first into the drain outside the front door. He stayed home from work, then went in to tender his resignation. He also arranged for someone to care for his child. He desperately wanted someone to locate his wife and resolve this distressing situation. While Evans remained in Wales, authorities in Notting Hill were alerted. They arrived at the house to conduct an investigation. It quickly became clear that something was wrong when 3 men were needed to lift the manhole cover. Evans could not have possibly done this, as he had asserted. Once the cover was removed, they discovered that there was no body inside. Back at Merthyr Vale, Evans was told of this. He was amazed, but immediately changed his statement. He would now tell the truth. He stated that it wasn't a stranger who had given him the abortion pills, but his neighbour, Reg Christie, who had disposed of Beryl in the drain. Evans had made the claim to shield himself from Christie. He explained that Christie had offered to assist Beryl with terminating the pregnancy, cautioning that the mixture he used was lethal and could be fatal. Despite the warning, Beryl was determined to try it. On November 8th, when Evans went to work, Beryl visited Christie. The substance she ingested had caused her death, and upon Evans' return home, he found her bleeding profusely. He had cared for the baby, while Christie disposed of the body. Christie came back, claiming he had temporarily left her in Mr. Kitchener's flat. He intended to wait until nightfall to place the body in one of the drains. Christie then informed Evans that he knew people who would take Geraldine. Evans was instructed to give Christie all of Geraldine's belongings. When Evans returned home on Thursday, his child was gone. Christie assured him that everything had been handled. He advised Evans to sell his furniture and depart, which he did. As the probe deepened, Evans embellished his account. He conceded that he had assisted Christie in moving his wife to the lower flat, but only because Christie was unable to manage it alone. He also mentioned that he had visited Christie weeks later to ask about his child, but was told it was too early to see her. He requested that the police contact his mother to obtain the address of the couple who had taken his child. He was eager to know how she was doing. The police investigated the house and garden at 10 Rillington Place, but their search was superficial. They never even saw the human thigh bone in the garden that propped up a trellis, let alone did any digging. Christie was called in for a 6-hour interrogation. He skillfully crafted his responses, and the police regarded him as trustworthy. Another officer interrogated Mrs. Christie, who had been instructed by her husband. Christie brushed off Evans' claims as absurd, labeling him a notorious liar. He then described the turbulent nature of Evans' marriage. When Beryl and the baby remained missing, the police conducted another search of the house. They moved to the backyard and attempted to enter the wash house, but the door was jammed. Mrs. Christie provided a metal tool to pry it open. Inside, it was dimly lit. They spotted some wood leaning against the sink. One officer reached behind the wood and felt something. They shifted the wood and uncovered what seemed to be a bundle wrapped in a green tablecloth and tied with cord. Mrs. Christie asserted she had never seen it before and had no idea what it was. They pulled the package out further and untied the cord. A pair of feet slipped out, revealing the decaying corpse of Beryl Evans. Further searching produced the baby, lying under some wood behind the door. Both had been strangled. A man's tie was still around the baby's neck. A post-mortem examination revealed that both had been deceased for approximately 3 weeks. Beryl bore bruises on her lip and right eye, suggesting she had been struck. She had been strangled with some sort of cord, possibly a rope. There was no indication that she had ingested anything to terminate her 3-month pregnancy, though there were bruises inside her vagina. Curiously, the doctor failed to take a vaginal swab to test for semen. Once Tim Evans was brought back to London from Wales, the Notting Hill police obtained 2 additional confessions from him. Initially, he admitted to being responsible for the deaths, expressing that it was a relief to unburden himself. He claimed he had murdered his wife due to her accumulating debts. They had argued, and he struck her, eventually strangling her with a piece of rope. He wrapped her body in the tablecloth she was found in and carried her to the apartment below. Subsequently, he placed her in the wash house at midnight on November 8th. The following day, he fed the baby and left her alone for the entire day, repeating this the next day as well. Then, he quit his job, returned home, and strangled his child with his tie, placing her in the wash house too. Evans could not have placed any bodies in the wash house during those days, as carpenters had been frequently accessing it all week and would have seen them. Additionally, he mentioned leaving the rope around Beryl's neck, yet no rope was ever discovered. Too many things didn't fit. After the arraignment, when his mother came to see him, he told her, "I didn't do it, ma'am," he insisted. Christie done it. On January 11, 1950, Evans was tried at the Old Bailey for the murder of his baby, but his wife's murder was also included in the testimony. The firm of Freeborough, Slack and Company accepted Evans' case, but neglected to pursue any investigation. It seemed they assumed his guilt and saw no need to put in any effort. They did not interview any of the carpenters, nor did they examine Christie's criminal history. A peculiar statement collected by the police came from Mrs. Christie. She asserted they fetched water from the wash house daily, yet she never observed anything out of the ordinary. This implied she had entered the wash house about 24 times while the bodies were present and had smelled nothing. Her dog, too, had detected nothing. Given that the room was only 4 by 5 feet, her claim appeared improbable. In court, she testified they never used the wash house, but the inconsistency was ignored. Christie stated that he had seen the wood in front of the sink on November 14th at 7:30 a.m., but denied placing it there. Yet, this was the same wood handed to him by the carpenter who had removed the flooring, and that task was completed on November 14th at 10 a.m. Once more, this inconsistency went ignored. Actually, nobody's statement corroborated Evans' account, not even those from the workmen who had been present. They stored their tools in the wash house and had cleared it out on the 11th. If there had been 2 bodies, someone would have seen them. However, no written statement was obtained from the carpenter who handed the wood to Christie. Malcolm Morris, the defense lawyer, met with Evans on multiple occasions. During these meetings, Evans expressed his fear that the police might assault him if he did not confess. This detail was crucial for arguing a false confession. Despite Evans' persistent claims that Christie was the actual perpetrator, Morris doubted they would be able to successfully blame the neighbor. Nonetheless, Evans maintained his account of the events, leading Morris to agree to prepare this defense. Christie took the stand against Tim, providing vivid descriptions of the quarrels he had overheard between Evans and his wife. Christie's composed and considerate manner won people over. His testimony, filled with mentions of himself as both a savior and a sufferer, starkly contrasted with Evans's seemingly bewildered and guilt-stricken demeanor. Christie ensured the jury was aware of his military service and his current health issues. Speaking softly, sometimes barely audible, he carefully considered each response and aimed to be as thorough and precise as possible. It was apparent that this honorable man was making every effort to appear cooperative. Evans professed his innocence, yet many believed he was merely attempting to deflect blame onto Christie. Given Evans' reputation as a liar and his poor performance on the witness stand, his claims lacked credibility. He stated that he only learned of his daughter's death when shown her clothes at the Notting Hill police station. Her death crushed his spirit, leading to his coerced confession. Fearing police brutality, he confessed to avoid physical harm. He also mentioned feeling a need to protect Christie, but couldn't convincingly explain why. Additionally, he failed to provide a clear motive for why Christie would kill his wife and daughter, except to say, well, he was home all day. The judge then instructed the jury that the case focus solely on the child's death. He disregarded Morris's argument about the medical text and Evans' illiteracy. He presented the jury with only 2 choices. Either Dr. Teare was lying about his autopsy findings, or Evans was being untruthful. Christie's deceit was never brought up as a possibility. Instead, the judge highlighted Christie's commendable record since his early offenses and emphasized Evans' history of lying. He even used sarcasm when summarizing Evans' motive for killing his child. The entire summation appeared biased against Evans and in favor of Christie. To many observers, it was clear that the jury understood the judge's expectations. After a 3-day trial and a 40-minute jury deliberation, Evans was found guilty and sentenced to death. He was hanged on March 9, 1950. Christie in the courtroom burst into tears. A guilty conscience or relief? Outside, Mrs. Probert shouted at Christie, "Murderer! Murderer!" Ethel Christie responded, "Don't dare call my husband a murderer. He's a good man." If only she knew. Following the trial, Christie sank into a severe depression, shedding nearly 28 pounds. He was also dismissed from his post office job because of revelations about previous offences. Subsequently, he underwent a 3-week observation period. A psychiatrist recommended hospitalisation for further examination, but Christie declined, unwilling to leave his wife unattended. Despite this, he continued to consult his physician, visiting 33 times over 8 months for stress-related issues. Christie wished his wife would go visit relatives as she usually did, but she did not. This frustrated him. He had certain plans he wanted to carry out, which he couldn't do with her present. Additionally, she'd been mocking him about his impotence, further infuriating him. On Thursday, December 11th, 5 days after Christie resigned from his job, Ethel went to watch television with her friend Rosie. The following day, she took laundry to Maxwell Laundries and seemed well and cheerful to those who saw her. She mentioned nothing about going on a trip. After that, she was not seen again. Christie then began to tell neighbours that his wife had gone off to Sheffield. He himself had a new job there and would follow her shortly. To relatives, he said that Ethel was not feeling well enough to write to them or send Christmas greetings. In January, Christie disposed of all his furniture by selling it to a dealer. He also sold his wife's wedding ring and watch. With no bed, he slept on an old mattress on the floor. The only items he retained were 3 chairs, one of which held particular significance to him, and a kitchen table. To obtain funds, he forged his wife's signature on her bank account and withdrew all the money. With that, he remained in his bare apartment through March, ignoring letters from relatives asking about his wife's whereabouts. One day, he saw Mrs. Riley searching for a rental and offered to show her his place. She brought her husband along, which Christie hadn't expected. The couple chose to rent the flat, paying 3 months' rent up front. Christie borrowed a suitcase from them and vacated the premises on March 20th. He had his dog put down but left the cat with the new tenants. He took their money and departed. The Rileys had barely moved in when the real landlord informed them that Christie had no authority to lease the flat. They were instructed to vacate. Both they and the landlord lost the rent money. But given the awful smell, they were relieved to leave. The landlord now had a vacant flat, so he allowed the tenant upstairs, Beresford Brown, to use the kitchen. Brown noticed an unpleasant odour and decided to clean up. As he worked, he thought about installing a new shelf for his radio. While knocking on the walls to find a suitable spot, he discovered one that sounded hollow. He assumed there might be a cupboard behind it. Brown peeled away some of the wallpaper and was happy to see a door, though it was tightly shut. He shone a light through the crack and then stepped back, unsure of what he had just seen. It appeared to him that there was a naked woman inside the wall. He had seen her back. He called the authorities. Several officers, the coroner, Chief Inspector Percy Law from Scotland Yard, and a pathologist arrived at Rillington Place. When the door was opened, they were confronted with the sight of a woman's body sitting among debris, her back turned toward them. Behind her was another large object, wrapped in a blanket. The blanket was tied to the woman's bra, which had been pulled up near her neck. She was otherwise dressed only in a garter belt and stockings. Her black sweater and white jacket were also pulled up around her neck. She was removed and transported to the front room for a photograph and examination. It quickly became apparent that she had been strangled with a ligature. Her wrists were bound in front of her with a handkerchief tied into a reef knot. The body was relatively well preserved. The police then turned their attention to the other object in the cupboard. As they took photographs, they noticed yet another tall, wrapped item just beyond it. They pulled out the first object and soon realized it was another body. This one had been placed upside down in the cupboard and propped against the wall. The blanket was secured with a sock tied into a reef knot around the ankles, and the head was wrapped in a pillowcase, also tied with a stocking into a reef knot. The third object was yet another body, positioned head down beneath the second one. Her ankles were bound with an electrical cord tied into a reef knot. A cloth covered her head, secured with the same type of knot. Nothing more was retrieved from the cupboard, and the bodies were transported to the mortuary. The investigators observed some loose floorboards in the parlour and decided to lift them. Beneath, they discovered more loose debris. As they began to dig, they unearthed yet another female body. They left it under police guard for the night, planning to return the following day to thoroughly search the entire area. The coroner's reports for the victims. The first corpse, brunette, age around 20, later determined to be 26. She had been dead around 4 weeks. She had died from strangulation and carbon monoxide poisoning. It was surmised that she had been under the effects of the poisoning when she was strangled with a smooth surface type of cord. She had been sexually assaulted at the time of death, or shortly after. Scratch marks on her back indicated that she had been dragged across the floor after she died. The second, around 25 years old with light brown hair, poorly manicured hands and feet. Healthy. She was pinkish in colour, a sign of gas poisoning, and had been asphyxiated by strangulation. She also had had sexual intercourse near the time of death and had been drinking heavily that day. She wore a cotton cardigan and vest, and another white vest had been placed between her legs in a diaper-like fashion. She had died 8 to 12 weeks earlier. The third, blonde, around 25 years old, poorly manicured. She wore a dress, petticoat, bra, cardigan, 2 vests, with a piece of material placed between her legs. She was pinkish in colour and had been gassed and asphyxiated. She had been drinking shortly before death, which had taken place 8 to 12 weeks earlier. She was also 6 months pregnant. The fourth body, brought to the mortuary the next day, was of a much older woman in her 50s, plump and with several teeth missing. She had been rolled up in a flannel blanket, her head covered with a pillowcase. A silk nightgown and a flowered dress were wrapped around her under the blanket. She wore stockings, pulled up. She had been dead 12 to 15 weeks. Unlike the others, there were no signs of coal gas poisoning or sexual intercourse. She had been strangled, probably by ligature. It was now necessary to determine their identities. It was quickly revealed that the elderly woman beneath the floorboards was Evans-Christie. The others were all prostitutes whom Christie had brought home to his near-empty flat. Hectorina McLennan, 26, Kathleen Maloney, 26, and Rita Nelson, 25. Authorities thoroughly inspected the flat, well aware that a double homicide had occurred in an upper-level apartment. They discovered a man's suit beneath the floor of the shared hallway, which had been accessible during the Evans murders. In the kitchen cupboard, they uncovered a man's tie tied into a reef knot. Additionally, they located potassium cyanide in a different section of the apartment and a tobacco tin holding 4 clumps of pubic hair, none of which belonged to the bodies discovered in the kitchen. The garden was also inspected by the police. This time, they spotted a human femur in plain sight, propping up the trellis. Additional bones were unearthed in flower beds, and some charred skull fragments with teeth and bits of a dress were found in a dustbin. More bones were located beneath an orange blossom bush. Nearby, they found a newspaper fragment dated July 19, 1943. A bundle of hair was discovered, along with some teeth. They concluded that, although only one skull was uncovered, there were 2 female bodies in the garden, bringing the total to 6 at Rillington Place. The skeletons were reassembled to aid in identification. It was quickly established from a dental crown that one of the victims, both of whom were women, hailed from either Germany or Austria. This victim was relatively young, approximately 21 years old, and stood about 5 feet 7 inches tall. The other woman was aged between 32 and 35 years and measured roughly 5 feet 2 inches in height. Both had been buried in the garden for a minimum of 3 years, with the possibility of having been there for up to a decade. Christie said that after departing from Rillington Place, his plan was to return, but instead, he stowed his borrowed suitcase in a locker and roamed through various London districts. As his funds dwindled, he ambled wherever possible, snatching sleep on benches and in cinemas. Eventually, he found himself near the Thames. On the final day of March, a police officer noticed him on the Putney Embankment. By this point, Christie had been wandering for 10 days. The officer inquired about his identity, to which he provided a fictitious name and address. When asked to remove his hat, his high, balding forehead, a distinguishing feature of Christie, was revealed, leading to his arrest. On his person were his identity card, a ration book, his union card, an ambulance badge, and oddly, an old newspaper clipping about the remand of Timothy Evans, with details about those killings. When presented with the evidence, Christie quickly confessed to the murder of his first 2 victims, but denied any involvement in the deaths of the Evans mother and child. However, he later admitted to killing Beryl Evans, though he insisted that he did not harm her child. According to Christie, Beryl's death was a mercy killing, similar to the case of his wife. He claimed that Beryl had attempted suicide using gas, and when he intervened, she pleaded with him to help her end her life. The following day, he said, he gassed and then strangled her. None of his claims about rescuing her and then assisting her were corroborated by medical evidence. Christie also asserted that Beryl offered him sex in exchange for his help, but he failed to perform. Christie's first known victim was Ruth Furst. Ruth occasionally worked as a waitress and also at a munitions factory. It is suspected she might have engaged in casual prostitution for additional income, though this remains unconfirmed. By 1943, she had become familiar with Christie and, according to him, had already visited the house at number 10 twice. On this particular occasion, Christie's wife Ethel was away in Sheffield visiting her family. Christie later detailed how, during intercourse with Ruth, he had strangled her with a rope. With his wife's return home imminent, Christie recounted how he had wrapped Ruth's body and concealed it beneath the front room floorboards. Some believe that Christie's actions were a response to the humiliation he suffered from the cuckolded soldier. Unable to tolerate his own perceived weakness, he sought to assert dominance. This provided him with an erotic satisfaction, and subsequently, he could only achieve sexual arousal with women who were powerless. "I remember," Christie wrote later, "as I gazed down at the still form of my first victim, experiencing a strange, peaceful thrill. Afterward, he gave it no thought." The following day, after Ethel left for work, he managed to transfer the body to the wash house in the backyard. He began to dig in the garden on the right-hand side, but his wife returned, and they shared a cup of tea. He waited until she retired for the night, before resuming his macabre chore. He placed the dead woman with her clothes into the hole, covered it up with earth, and went to bed. "The next day," he confessed, "I straightened the garden and raked it over." He gathered some of Ruth's clothes and incinerated them in the old dustbin. Months later, he inadvertently dug up her skull and disposed of it by burning it with other trash. Shortly after the murder, towards the end of 1943, Christie stepped down from his position as a reserve constable. He subsequently secured employment with a radio company, Ultra Radio Works, located in Acton. It wasn't long before he encountered his next victim, 32-year-old Muriel Eady, who worked in the assembly department. Christie frequently invited Muriel and her friend over for tea, which his wife would serve. On one occasion, the four of them even went to the movies together. Christie then schemed to lure Muriel to his home, intending to replicate what he had done to Ruth Feuerst. On Saturday, 7th October 1944, Muriel departed from home at 4 p.m., following lunch with her aunt to run some errands. Mrs. Hooper remembered her stating at lunch, "I shan't be late," and noted she was dressed in a black dress, black shoes, a camel-coloured coat, but no hat. However, Muriel never made it back home and did not show up at work on Monday. She had not disclosed her true destination to anyone. Christie had meticulously plotted Muriel's murder, taking sick leave from work for a week. Christie lured Eady back to his apartment, promising her a special mixture that could remedy her bronchitis. Eady was instructed to inhale the mixture from a jar with a tube attached to the top. The concoction was actually Friar's balsam, which Christie used to mask the odour of domestic gas. As Muriel inhaled, she breathed in carbon monoxide. Within a minute, she was weakened, allowing Christie to strangle her with a stocking. During this, he had sex with her. "I had intercourse with her while I strangled her." Deprived of oxygen, she died swiftly. Christie once more felt the serene thrill over the lifeless body of his victim. He then moved her body to the shared wash house as he prepared a burial spot in the garden. He buried her, still clothed, close to the initial grave. While digging in the garden later, he discovered a broken femur bone, which he repurposed to support the trellis. Christie remained with Ultra Electrics until the 8th of April 1946. On the morning of 14th December 1952, around 8:15 a.m., Christie strangled Ethel in their bed using a stocking. After 3 days, he hid her body beneath the floorboards of the front room. She was clothed in a silk nightdress, wrapped in a blanket fastened with a safety pin, and covered with rubble. After his arrest a few months later, Christie gave conflicting statements regarding the death of his wife. First, he said his wife was depressed about some neighbours. "I'll tell you as much as I can remember. I have not been well for a long while. My wife has been suffering a great deal from persecution and assaults from the black people in the house 10 Rillington Place, and had to undergo treatment at the doctor for nerves. In December, she was becoming very frightened from these blacks and was afraid to go about the house when they were about, and she got very depressed." But then he claimed, "On 14th December, I was awakened by my wife moving about in bed. I sat up and saw that she appeared to be convulsive. Her face was blue and she was choking. I did what I could to try to restore breathing, but it was hopeless. It appeared too late to call for assistance. That's when I couldn't bear to see her, so I got a stocking and tied it around her neck to put her to sleep. Then it was a case of failed suicide. I got out of bed and saw a small bottle and a cup half full of water on a small table near the bed. I noticed that the bottle contained 2 phenylbarbital tablets, and it originally contained 25. I then knew that she must have taken the remainder. I got them from the hospital because I couldn't sleep. I left her in bed for 2 or 3 days and didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do? Then I remembered some loose floorboards in the front room. I had to move a table and some chairs to roll back the lino about halfway. Those boards had previously been up because of the drainage system. There were several of these depressions under the floorboards. Then I believe I went back and put her in a blanket or a sheet or something and tried to carry her, but she was too heavy, so I had to sort of half carry and half drag her and put her in that depression and cover her up with earth. I thought that was the best way to lay her to rest. In a further statement, Christie claimed that he had put Ethel under the floorboards so that he could still be near her. I think that in my mind I did not want to lose her. The other 3 women, too, were not his fault. Since they were women of disrepute, he claimed they were the aggressors, with him, a man of virtue who had no choice but do what he did. According to Christie's account, Nelson told him she would scream and accuse him of assault if he didn't give her 30 shillings. He walked away and she followed, forcing her way into his house. She picked up a frying pan to hit him. They struggled, and she fell back on a chair that happened to have a rope hanging from it. Christie blacked out and woke up to find her strangled. He left her there, had some tea, and went to bed. When he discovered her still there in the morning, he wrapped her up, diapered her, and shoved her into the cupboard. I pulled away a small cupboard in the corner, he recalled, and gained access to a small alcove. She was 24 weeks pregnant. Christie had encountered Kathleen Maloney, 26, 3 weeks prior to Christmas. He had accompanied her and another sex worker to a room where he had photographed the other woman in the nude. One evening, he entered a Notting Hill cafe and joined Kathleen and another girl at their table, where they were discussing their search for apartments. Kathleen went home with Christie that night and was never seen again. He later claimed she had made advances to leverage his influence with the landlord and then threatened him with violence. He only remembered her being on the floor and putting her into the cupboard. He did not recall killing her. In reality, he had created a new gas device. He placed her in a chair, an easy task since she was quite intoxicated, and used the gas. Then he strangled her with a rope, had intercourse with her, and placed a diaper between her legs before going to bed. He did not admit to the sexual contact or the gassing of these women until later. The following morning, he brewed tea while the body remained in the chair. He then wrapped her corpse in a blanket, covered her head with a pillowcase, and placed her in the alcove. Her body lay on the floor with her legs propped against the back wall. He concealed her with dirt and ashes before sealing the cupboard. Christie's account of Hectorina McLennan, 26, revealed that she and her boyfriend were struggling to find accommodation, prompting Christie to invite them to stay with him. They endured several uncomfortable days in a sparsely furnished flat. According to one version of events, Christie had asked them to leave. The girl returned alone the following night to wait for her boyfriend, and when Christie attempted to make her leave, a struggle ensued. Some of her clothes were torn in the scuffle. She went limp and collapsed to the floor, with some of her clothing seemingly wrapped around her neck. Christie dragged her into the kitchen and placed her on a chair. Believing she was dead, he stored her body in the cupboard as well. He also recounted another version. While Hectorina and her boyfriend were at the labour exchange, Christie arrived and invited Hectorina to visit his house alone that morning. He offered her a drink and then released gas by unfastening a clasp. She attempted to escape, but he intercepted her in the hallway. I seized hold of her by the neck and applied just sufficient pressure to make her limp. I took her back to the kitchen, and I decided that it was essential to use the gas again. I made love to her and then put her back in the chair. I killed her. He positioned her in the alcove, keeping her upright by hooking her brassiere to the blanket around Maloney's legs. When Hectorina's boyfriend came searching for her, Christie claimed he hadn't seen her. He invited the young man inside to look around and offered him tea, during which time the boyfriend detected a foul smell. Nevertheless, he departed without investigating further. Numerous psychiatrists evaluated Christie, and he shared many specifics, though not all were truthful. The physicians collectively found the man repulsive, describing him as nauseating and snivelling. He often whispered when confronted with questions he disliked, similar to his behavior during the Evans trial. When recounting his heinous acts, he detached himself, speaking in the third person as though he were merely an observer. His confessions were riddled with evasions and falsehoods. Christie also bragged about his vile actions to fellow inmates, likening himself to the notorious John George Hay, the acid bath murderer responsible for 6 women's deaths. Christie claimed his ambition had been to kill 12. Later, he actually told a chaplain that he didn't believe he had killed Beryl, but his lawyer had suggested that admitting to more murders would strengthen an insanity defense. He stood trial at the Old Bailey on June 22, 1953, on the charge of murdering his wife. It was the same court where Evans had been tried. Christie himself took the stand and appeared noticeably anxious to those watching. He tugged at his ear, clasped and unclasped his hands, rubbed his head, stroked his cheek, and adjusted his collar. He detailed each murder, although many of his responses to his lawyer's questions were barely audible. When asked why he had omitted Beryl Evans in his comprehensive confession to the police, he claimed he had forgotten that one. Even though he had testified at a trial just 4 years earlier, it had gone clean out from his mind. The trial lasted only 4 days, and the jury deliberated only an hour and 20 minutes. Their verdict: guilty. He was sentenced to death. Christie did not appeal, and there appeared to be no medical grounds for reprieve. He was hanged at Pentonville Prison on July 15, 1953, by the same executioner who hanged Timothy Evans. A year later, Rillington Place had its name changed to Ruston Close. The entire block was demolished in 1978. It looks very different now. In courtrooms and Parliament halls, people ask questions. How did police miss it? Why did no one listen when Evans blamed Christie? On October 18, 1966, Buckingham Palace announced that the Queen had granted a posthumous free pardon to Timothy Evans. 16 years too late. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It means a lot and helps the channel grow. See you next time.